today in Rich in Relationship. We're going to talk about
the essential concept for real repair, which is containment. Containment protects the healing process and encourages it by creating boundaries around the pain. It allows the nervous system to process difficult emotions in manageable doses. Healing after a breakdown, whether it's in your body or your relationship, requires care. It requires being honest. If you look at the wound and there's a big piece of dirt in it and you say, oh, it's clean, that's not honest. It requires honesty. It requires accountability. Welcome to another episode of Rich in Relationship. I'm your host, Rich Heller. And today, in this series on disruption and healing, we're talking about containment, which is the missing ingredient for healing. Why partnerships need structure and pacing after a rupture, not emotional flooding. And let's face it, when the stuff hits the fan, people tend to be very explosive. That is not healing. That's kind of like, let's say you get a cut and you say, oh my God, I cut myself, and you start ripping at it and pulling at it, right? That's kind of the equivalent of what we do as human beings when there is a mistake or rupture or a breach of trust or whatever you want to call the thing that is disruptive to your marriage. And if you're working together, it makes it even worse, but it's pretty bad whether you're working together or not. And so what we're going to talk about here today is how to contain the rupture so it doesn't become emotional Armageddon is probably the best way to describe it. Tony writes, after something painful happens in our relationship, we try to talk about it, but the conversations become overwhelming. Either we end up arguing again, or one of us shuts down, feeling like we're trying to fix things, but somehow making them worse. How are couples supposed to actually feel after a breakdown? And let's face it, what's happening there for that listener is that the attempts to heal it, to make it better, are actually overwhelming emotionally. Any conversation is spiraling into conflict or shutdown when what we're hoping for is to learn how to create an emotional safe space so that we can heal the relationship, so that we can move forward. And this is so normal, it's sad. Not healthy, not good, but normal. By normal, I mean it's what everyone seems to do. When people get upset, they blow up more and more and more. It's that myth. The myth is don't go to bed mad. So this happens, and by the way, this particularly happens in the evening when people's emotional energy is run down, when they're out of patience, when they're hungry, angry, lonely, and tired, right? Something happens and both people are not emotionally equipped to handle it, but they try to, because don't go to bed mad, and it gets worse and worse and worse and worse until 2 a.m. They have some makeup sex, but the issue isn't really resolved. If they're lucky, they have makeup sex. Maybe not, because makeup sex can be really disruptive. Brad and Gwen had some problems with this. Even though they had done some healing, Brad had let go of a lot of stuff around shame involving his father. If you listen to the episodes, you know what I'm talking about. Gwen had let go of a lot of stuff about abandoning that coincidentally, or maybe not so much, had to do with her father. They were getting into big time fights, especially late at night. And a lot of it was about work. Even though they had systems and roles, there were problems in the business that neither of them could solve. And they had, because they were tired, because they were exhausted, they were showing their best face to their workers, showing their best face to their kids. The explosions were happening at night, and it was getting worse and worse because they'd go to work tired the next day. And the fights were over little things. Half of the fighting, they later identified, was just that they had a lot of pent-up frustration and didn't know how to express it. The other half was they were worried that despite all the work they'd done, they were still spiraling out of control at work, that they wouldn't be able to feed themselves or their family. Gwen said, I don't understand how this happened. We've been working so hard. And Brad said, we have talked about this for hours already. I don't know what else to say. That was like a typical, midnight fight for them. Brad's wanting to let it go. I needed to go to sleep. Gwen, like, I just don't understand. And all on this myth of don't go to bed mad. Some nights the conversation lasted till 2 a.m., leaving them both emotionally drained for the next day. Brad began to dread the conversations. Gwen felt increasingly desperate for clarity, and things in the business were not getting better because they were tired and they weren't getting answers. They were both trying to heal whatever it was, but they didn't have a structure and pacing for dealing with crisis, right? They were going through a crisis. They had structure and pacing for day-to-day life. They did not have something for crisis. So they gave us a call, Rich. Hey, Rich, help. And we started to work on containment. And they were like, isn't that like avoidance? Or isn't that like denial? It's like containment is the equivalent of sometimes you just need to put something on the shelf until your battery is fully charged, right? If your battery is run down and you try and solve a problem, it's easy to slip into desperation, even despair. Containment means creating a structured space for processing difficult emotions so they do not overwhelm the entire relationship system, and in this case, their business as well. So instead of trying to fix it when it was coming up at 9, 10, 11 at night, they practiced 3 forms of containment. 1, if something came up, if Gwen was freaking out about something or Brad was freaking out about something, they had an understanding. You know what? Let's talk about this tomorrow at 11. After we've gotten the kids to school and after things at work are on keel, let's talk about it over lunch at 12, but let's make sure we do it when we're both feeling energized and calm. 2, let's limit this conversation. We don't have to fix it, right? Part of the problem was they felt, we got to fix this because if we don't fix it, it's going to mess everything up tomorrow. And sure enough, they wouldn't fix it. And it was like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So they had an agreement that the conversation would be time limited and they wouldn't have to fix it. They could have one conversation to explore it, one conversation to brainstorm, and another conversation to pick a path that might work. Or they could do it all at once if they got that lucky, but they gave themselves permissions to not fix it and to stay in a time boundary because they had other concerns. They had a business, they had kids, and they worked on stabilizing rituals. Not together, separately. Each of them had stuff they did that soothed them. Brad liked to walk. Gwen was into reorganizing the closets, whatever rings your bell, right? Some people really get a charge out of reorganizing closets, by the way. Sometimes they changed it up, but what they knew was that when you're anxious, when you have anything that triggers your amygdala, that triggers intense emotion, that gets you into feeling desperate, that brings up chemistry in the body that has to be worked out through doing. So part of the stabilizing ritual was to do something. Another part would be to pray, meditate, practice mindfulness, whatever rings your bell. And the third is to talk to someone else about it. In this case, they were working with us. And through following these 3 forms of containment, they were able to regulate themselves. They were able to come to the table when they were regulated and thus solve some of these problems that seemed unsolvable. So instead of fighting till 2 in the morning and ripping the wound open further and throwing salt in it in the process, they learned to contain it. Because through containment, they could approach it with more care, with more concern. And many couples come to me with this misunderstanding that healing means talking about an issue as much as possible and fixing it right away. We got to fix it now. It's part of our checkbox mindset, checkbox mentality. It's part of going through our phones constantly and getting all our emails cleaned up and blah, 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 blah. All right? That's not how we're wired neurologically. When emotional intensity floods the nervous system, the brain loses its capacity for reflection. It loses its capacity for empathy. It loses its capacity for problem solving. That's why it's so important to contain, self-regulate, and reapproach. Without containment, conversations about breakdowns, mistakes, rupture, whatever you want to call it, can trigger the dynamics that cause the damage in the first place. Not only that, it can escalate the problem. It can increase defensiveness. It can lead to emotional shutdown and emotional exhaustion. And I know you know what I'm talking about. We have all had that fight over and over and over, unresolved and literally shredding the fabric of our lives. You don't have to work together to have this, but if you work together and you have this going on, it's even worse because you go to work and you're glaring at each other at work. Containment protects the healing process and encourages it by creating boundaries around the pain. It allows the nervous system to process difficult emotions in manageable doses. In other words, healing does not come from unlimited processing. We don't process it to death, all right? Healing comes from structured integration. Just go back to the wound metaphor. If you have a cut, first you clean it gently, then you may put an antiseptic on it, you may not, depending on who you are. Then you cover it over, and it doesn't heal right away. In fact, you take the bandage off the next day, and you make sure it's clean, and if it isn't clean, you clean it some more, and you put a bandage on it. To some extent, healing is natural, and this is the same with our psyches. When we try and force a solution, we're literally going against our own mind, our own psyche, our body heals a certain way, our emotional well-being heals a certain way. Our emotional well-being heals very much the same way that our body does. It's one organism. All the components have a similar rhythm, a metabolic energy. Emotional healing has a metabolic energy. Are you tracking what I'm laying down here? And so, why this worked for Brad and Gwen is they acknowledge that once a day, when they're at their most attentive and careful selves, their batteries fully charged and everything taken care of and no distractions, they would open up the wound, make sure it was clean, see how it was healing. Oh, maybe it needs stitches and we didn't give it stitches. Or maybe we need to take more vitamins. Or maybe there's something we missed here. They carefully and systematically allowed healing to happen. You can't make healing happen. But with the right mindset, you can encourage healing to happen. Doctors will tell you your body will heal best with the right mindset. Brad and Gwen implemented several containment practices. The first was processing agreements. They agreed that heavy topics would be discussed very intentionally, not impulsively during moments of stress, carefully. They would do emotional capacity checks to make sure they had the energy. Hey, there's something I need to talk to you about. No, not right now. I'm wrong. Could we talk about it tomorrow at noon? Do we both have the capacity to hold this right now emotionally? If not, let's schedule it for later. They protected the relationship space. They intentionally created moments where the relationship was not about the rupture. Now that almost sounds like denial. This is what they call healthy denial. All right. You sort of pretend that the rupture isn't going on and act like everything's normal. You have other kinds of connection, play everyday life while it's healing, right? If you have a major wound, you don't stop living. You just don't do things that agitate that wound. And this balance allows healing to occur without losing the rest of your life and your relationship in the process. Healing after a breakdown, whether it's in your body or your relationship, requires care. It requires being honest. If you look at the wound and there's a big piece of dirt in it and you say, oh, it's clean, that's not honest. It requires honesty. It requires accountability. I need to be accountable for making sure that I do what I can and need to do to heal as best as possible on both sides and repair. Hey, and if you're confused about accountability and feeling bad about yourself, if you feel like you're losing dignity when these fights are going on, go back to the past episode on shame. Without containment, even the best intentions can overwhelm the relationship. Containment protects the nervous system, your own nervous system, the nervous system of the partnership, and it creates conditions where healing can actually occur. Why do doctors do surgery in quiet, clean, sterile environments where everyone on their team is in harmony? Because those are the ideal conditions for promoting health and healing and repair. Similarly, Brad and Gwen created distraction-free time when they could give their relationship their full attention so that they could promote healing, health, and repair. Now, we've talked in this series a lot about breaches of trust, and infidelity has been alluded to and mentioned, but the next episode is going to be the deep dive. It's when a partnership shatters, right? Sometimes things happen that just shatter the partnership, all right? Infidelity, trust, and the long road back is the topic. And I'm going to encourage you to, even if you haven't experienced this, listen to it because it's going to give you hope. It's going to help you to know that no matter what your relationship, your partnership comes up against, there is a road to recovery if you want it. And they want it. They got to want it too. Both of you got to want it. And it's not just an exploration of when partnership shatters. It's a conversation with a new friend, Dr. Lee Bocom, about the deeper dynamics of infidelity and what actually helps couples rebuild it. So stay tuned and listen to the next episode of Rich in Relationship. And in the meantime, have an amazing day and a fantastic tomorrow.